Things don't happen all at once, of course. They start gradually, changes occurring imperceptibly. You barely notice the differences, and once they make themselves known, they seem so small that you easily accept them. Adjust your life in a minuscule way. Everyone can make minuscule adjustments. Then there's another change, a bigger one. But you can still adjust so easily, no problem really. And then another change, another adjustment, and so on and so on. And before you know it, you're living a life that by all accounts should be unrecognizable, but to you is just normal. Your life is that of a stranger's, but it doesn't bother you at all. Did the Greenbone Saga or the September House live up to the hype? Hey friends, I'm Letty. Welcome back to my channel. I had a pretty good reading month in February again. I read 10 books, a little over 4,000 pages. My goal is to read 100 pages a day, and I exceeded that again at about 138 pages a day. And I read 8 physical books, 2 audio. Well, one of the audio was like partial physical, part audio. And the different genres I read were sci-fi, thriller, horror, fantasy, cozy fantasy, and historical fiction. And there was 1 short story collection. And my ratings range from 2.5 star to 5 star. So really only like 1 dud. So not too bad, no DNFs. By the way, sorry if there's background noise. I have to have the window open, otherwise it gets really stuffy. And I swear, I live in the noisiest neighborhood possible. There's cars zooming by, sirens, there's a train track over there, there's some kind of like racing track over here. There's always stuff going on, but I can't be cooped up in here without the window open, so hopefully it's not too distracting. Anyway, my 2.5 star was Exit Black by Joe Pitkin, and this is a sci-fi thriller. This is 257 pages, and I found out about this book from the channel Venus Escapes to Read, and I had initially had Upgrade by Blake Crouch on my TBR, and then I found out about this one. I'm like, well, that sounds really good. I can always come back to Blake Crouch, so I'm going to bump him off and read this one instead because it sounded really good. And basically, quick synopsis, we have it's like a hotel in low orbit Earth that really rich people go hang out on, and they used to have like a lab up there that they would do some experiments on, and they've since shut that down, and they're converting it now to a motel for really rich people. And it turns out that there's like a terrorist group that they don't like the fact that there's rich people in the world, and they want to go after them. And so that basically happens on the motel. So it's like there's people that are working there in the motel. You have the lady who used to be in the lab, but she's still there kind of closing things down. She's the main character, the one that you follow. And then you have other hotel employees there, like guest services and stuff like that. And then they have the rich people that are going to go stay up there for the first time. And you have the terrorist group that comes up there. And they're basically blackmailing them to get a bunch of money. And it sounded good. And it was a quick read. I mean, it's a short book, but I kept wondering, there has to be a greater motivation than just, oh, I hate rich people. Like, oh, they're billionaires, let's go attack them. Because that seems like that's like a big deal, to risk your life and go up into low orbit Earth and have to wear these special suits in case something happens, in case, you get a hole in the motel and you get sucked out to space or something. That's a very risky situation. And it made me just question, well, there has to be some other reason other than just, oh, I just don't like rich people. But spoiler alert, sorry, there's really no other reason other than they just don't like rich people. I thought maybe there's some kind of personal vendetta, something bigger that had happened, but no. So I was like, that was kind of hard to believe. Why would you go through all that just because you don't like rich people? Also, I'm like, did this have an editor? Because, it was traditionally published, Blackstone Publishing, but there's literally something that is repeated verbatim. So on page 142, I'm going to say it. It's not really a spoiler. You don't have context for it. So this is a quote from one of the characters. "I've got the hub sealed off, Chief. The bridge is open. Chloe's escaped." And then he says, "Roger that. Retake the bridge and wait for my orders." And then on page 152, she says again, I've got the hub sealed off, Chief. The bridge is open. Chloe's escaped. And then he says again, Roger that. Retake the bridge and wait for my orders. What? And then when I read that, I was like, wait, didn't that already happen? Wasn't she already on the bridge and discovered that? And I went back, I'm like, oh my god, yeah, it's the same exact quotes, like verbatim. The only thing is, the second time, like, something kind of different happened after he said that to her about, like, retaking the bridge. So it makes me wonder if he, like, accidentally put that earlier and forgot to take it out. Because you can't have, like, how did that happen? You can't have, like, the same exact thing happen and then, like, nothing. Because I was like, wait, did something change? Did she leave and come back? But no. It's literally just like, I think it's just a total mistake. And also, this is just like a total personal thing. I don't like it when books mention the CV-19. Y'all know what I'm talking about? You know, that horror show of 2020. I don't like it when books mention that. I don't want to ever hear about that again. So it mentioned it in a couple times, and it was like, oh, they didn't want to shake hands because of blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my god, seriously, stop already with that. Anyway, this was disappointing, fortunately, and I would like to take this time to personally apologize to Mr. Crouch. I am so sorry that I knocked your book upgrade off my TBR. I didn't know what I was doing, okay? Please forgive me. I will never let that happen again. 2.5 stars. And my first 3.5 star book is Bad Dolls by Rachel Harrison, and these are horror short stories. There's 4 stories in here. Look how cute the little muñeca. It's so cute. By the way, you can only get a physical copy from the UK. I ordered this from Blackwell's. I think it was like 12 or 13 bucks free shipping. And I got it fairly quick. I think like under a couple weeks. So really not that bad. So if you want to read it like physically, that's how you have to get it. Otherwise, there's only an ebook, and I don't do ebooks. So I'm glad I got the physical copy. Super cute little book. Also, the book itself is yellow. And then it has like the red end papers. Now, if you like Rachel Harrison, you would probably like this book. It's very reminiscent of her other books I've read so far, from her Cackle and Black Sheep. I don't have any interest in reading Such Sharp Teeth. However, I would like to read The Return, her debut novel, and in October I think she's coming out with a vampire one called So Thirsty, so I can't wait for that. So these stories are really cool. The only thing I noticed is that now that I've read these 4 stories and 2 of her other books, it seems almost like her main character is like the same person. It's like the same character, but just at different times, different places, different universes. Now, it's still relatable, absolutely, and entertaining and a little snarky and stuff like that, but it kind of seems like it's the same one character. So I don't know if maybe that's just her thing, but that's just something to keep in mind. Like I said, entertaining, engaging, and relatable, especially one quote I would like to share. And this is when she's at a bachelorette party and they're all chit-chatting and she's kind of being quiet. And it says, I was excavating an unwanted mushroom when Jacqueline turned to me and said, "You're quiet." And she thinks to herself, it's absolutely well, that's definitely not quiet. Okay, anyway. You guys don't even know how many times I've had to stop and start because of stuff like that. I was excavating an unwanted mushroom when Jacqueline turned to me and said, "You're quiet." And then she thinks to herself, it's absolutely insufferable when someone tells you you're being quiet when you're actually being ignored. Now, I wouldn't say I necessarily have a problem being ignored. It's more so like most things that other people are interested in, I'm not, and vice versa. Like, they talk about celebrities, TV shows, sports, video games, and I'm like, what? I don't care about any of that. Can we talk about books? So this was enjoyable. I gave it 3.5 stars, and I'd recommend it if you like Rachel Harrison. And my next 3.5 star book is Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. This is cozy fantasy, 332 pages. And I read this in my Jante's Inferno readathon reading log, so I'll have that link down below in case you missed it. And this is really cute. It's a prequel to Legends and Lattes, which I read a couple years ago. And this is another low-stakes, high fantasy situation. We follow Viv, the orc who gets injured out on the battlefield, and so she goes to recuperate at this quaint little beach town, and she ends up befriending a bookshop owner, this little rat lady right here, and she owns a bookshop and it's not doing too well. She kind of feels disheartened about it, but Viv has some ideas and she actually ends up helping her with it, and she ends up kind of really enjoying her time there, even though she still misses being out on the battlefield. And there are some actual things to be worried about in this book because there is some kind of creature that is after them, and she thinks she's safe out there, but then it turns out that maybe not so much. So this was really cute. We have fantastical creatures, cute little animals. There's some funny parts as well. And you have little excerpts of the stories that Viv is reading because her friend, the bookshop owner, starts to recommend books to her. And she really enjoys being able to do that for somebody, because if you're a fellow book lover, you love that feeling of being able to recommend a book to someone and then they end up loving it. That's such a good feeling, you know? So I liked all the references to books and stories and the reasons why people read. And even more so, it goes over reasons why people do what they do. There is some tension in here, a little action, a little adventure. And there is a mild sapphic romance / relationship, but there's no steam or spice or smut or anything like that. So of course I appreciated that. Overall, I did enjoy it and I gave it 3.5 stars. And my last 3.5 star book I also read in that reading vlog, and that's Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. And this is a thriller / horror survival. It's 341 pages. And the only other book I've read by Darcy Coates so far has been From Below, which I read I think last June. And I love that book so much. It's a 5-star all-time favorite. So this is not all-time favorite status, but I still did enjoy it. And like many people said, I did find it a little predictable. The person who I suspected right away ended up being the killer. Even though I guessed it, it was still fun. And in this we follow our main character, who is taking a bus with her boyfriend with a bunch of other people, and they are traveling out to this one huge cabin out in the middle of nowhere, and of course it's snowy, so we have the isolated setting. And something happens with the bus. They can't take it anymore. They all get off the bus and they end up trekking it, and they find this other cabin and they all stay in there. Well, they start getting picked off one by one. And it did remind me a lot of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. I know a lot of books are compared to that, but it really did give me those vibes. Similar to the 12 Days of Murder that I read in December. And in this one, similar thing. You have the characters who are being picked off one by one, and you're left questioning, like, okay, even if you know who did it or you think you know who did it, you want to know what the full motivation is. I knew part of the motivation, but I wasn't quite sure like how everything else was connected, and that all gets explained in the ending. I would say if you're looking for an isolated snowy winter recommendation, this would definitely be a good one. 3.5 stars. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that this is a pretty fast-paced read. Very short chapters. I'm talking like 3 or 4 pages long. Darcy Coates does a really good job with the pacing and leaving you want to just keep reading. And I found that is pretty similar to From Below. She has propulsive writing. You just want to keep reading and reading. You don't want to put it down. And my 1 4-star book for the month of February is Out by Natsuyo Kirino. And this is a Japanese crime thriller. This has been compared to like an American Psycho, so I guess it'd be like Japanese Psycho. Only we are centered on 4 female characters, and oh my god, the scandal, the betrayal, the blackmail. Oh my god, this thing gets a little juicy. And I mainly read this via the audiobook. I think it's only available on Audible, so just heads up on that. And it is structured a little bit differently. It's not just chapters 1, 2, 3, and so on. It goes by like sections. You'll have like the workplace chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, the bathroom chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, this place chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So just something to keep in mind if you're following along physically. It can get a little confusing, so I just had to be really diligent about making sure I was in the right place, you know, matching up the physical book with audiobook. But this was really good, pretty unique. I don't think I've read any kind of story like this. And this does have some pretty gruesome things in it. However, it focuses mainly on the characters. And so we have our 4 main characters. They work at a lunchbox manufacturing shop, and one of them ends up killing her husband. That's not a spoiler, that's in the synopsis. And she gets her friends to help her. And so it goes on from there, and it just gets wild. And it is really interesting. It really makes you think. I mean, it really got my little hamster wheel going. So I actually made a lot of notes. So I'm going to take a look at my reading journal. I have this cute little reading journal here that I like to make notes in while I'm reading. Because sometimes I'll have like like a post-it note in here and I'll make notes on, but this one was so, like, there was more to it than that. One more thing before we get into the reading journal notes is there is a conversion in the front here where you can go from yen to USD. So in the book, when they say like 1,000,000 yen, you're not like, wow, that's a lot. It's $8,000. So I really appreciated that. So I got like some frame of reference. So this had some funny, like, dark humor bits. I kind of like giggled a little bit at some of the things. There were easy to follow characters and plot. There was commentary on a dead person and whether they're just an object or if they deserve dignity even after death. Some other questions that it raises: does everybody have a price? Are people willing to go against their morals to help friends or acquire money? It definitely shows that desperate people do desperate things. It explores the ugly side of being human. And one of the characters was dealing with a dead body, and she thought, oh wow, a dead body is such a revolting thing, but it's not as bad as a living thing because this dead thing can't hurt you. And then they would refer to like the corpse as trash. It was almost like they were trying to separate themselves from what they were doing. And then it also raises the questions: do friends help you because they're being a good friend, or are they helping you so they can somehow get leverage on you about something else? And this also shows that you are comprised of your past, whether you face it or not. So of course this goes probably without saying that a little TW about murder, body disposal, and there's also a little bit of SA in here, which, you know, I'm not a fan of. I really don't like to read about that, but in an audiobook, it's kind of hard to skip over that. So if you don't like that sort of thing, there are a few instances of it. There's a couple times where it's talked about like in the past, but in a little bit of detail, and then there's another time where it's happening in real time. So if you don't like that sort of thing, but you still want to read the book, because it is a really good book, I would still recommend it. I would recommend reading it physically so you can like skip it over, you know. It's easier to skip over things if you're reading physically. So yeah, this was really good. If you're looking for a crime thriller that just ends up spiraling out of control and has really interesting characters, highly recommend. 4 stars. And my 4.5-star rating technically goes to 3 books. That's right. The Greenbone Saga, the Jade City Trilogy by Fonda Lee. And yes, this did live up to the hype. So I do rate series like all together as one, but if I had to give like least favorite to most favorite, my least favorite would be Jade Legacy, the 3rd one, and then I like Jade City, the 1st one, a little bit more, and then my favorite was actually the 2nd book, Jade War, which is, I think, fairly uncommon. Usually there's this thing called the middle book syndrome where the 2nd book tends to lag. It's like a bridge between the 1st and the 3rd, but I really enjoyed this. This one's full of action. It is so good, fast-paced. So in this, if you're not familiar, there is Jade, and it is very tied into their culture and their history. It has some religious importance as well, and there are certain people whom it really affects, and they're able to gain some greater powers from it. There's 4 specific things that it can give them, and those 4 things are deflect, steal, light, and perception. So deflect, I mean, they can like sweep their hand like that and things will get pushed back. They can use steal, which means if they know that they're going to get hit with something, they can steal themselves and they can absorb the impact a lot better and not really get injured. And they can do light, which means they can like jump up really high, they can land really softly, it helps them be agile. And then the last one is perception. So those who are wearing Jade, they give off what's called a Jade aura. And they typically what they do is they wear jewelry with it, piercings, or they do like body mods with it. Like sometimes they'll have them like embedded in their skin, kind of like that. And so it gives off a Jade aura. So other people who are wearing Jade, they can tell their Jade aura, like how strong they are. They can perceive them coming towards them. Like let's say somebody is after them, they can sense that intent. And then let's say they're just talking to them face to face, they can tell whether they're lying. And Jade is very valuable. It's also a big part of their economy. There are some people who it doesn't really affect, and so they can handle it without getting sick or anything like that, because it's almost like something you have to build up your tolerance to. And they do make this thing called a shrine, and it helps people be like immune to it, so they can wear more and more jade without getting sick, because you can actually like OD on it as well. It can give them like health problems if they wear too much, like if they don't build up their tolerance to it. This is like Godfather, but make it Asian. There's warring clans, there's family legacy, there's a martial arts school that kids go to for 8 years. There's different countries that they expand to. This is a really immersive, expansive story. And I did read Jade War in that reading vlog, so that will be in that as well. I'll just hold this one up though, since it's the first one. And it was really funny when I was reading this, I would get so immersed in the story. And I mean, I read for hours at a time, and then sometimes I'd look up and like, oh, let me make a tea, let me get a snack, and be like, oh yeah, that's right, this isn't real. I had to like actively separate it in my mind that these aren't real countries, they're not real people, they're not real events, this didn't really happen. It felt so real. It was like, when you have a dream and then when you wake up and it feels so real, like it really feels like it happened. That's what this reading experience was for me. And I love these characters. You get to follow them for a long time, many years. The writing, the plot, everything was really good. There's just a couple things. Wanted to note that there is a couple instances of like some spicy scenes in each of the books, like I think maybe 2 or 3 in each of the books, which are easy enough to scan over if you're reading it physically. The other thing which I really noticed in Jade Legacy, and this one, the books get longer as the series progresses. The first book is about 500 pages, the second book is about 600, and the third book is about 700 pages. And so this one, Legacy, as it suggests, really spans over a longer period of time, and it kind of does these time jumps, but you don't really know. Like sometimes in books where they have different time periods, it's like going forward in time, it will tell you at the beginning of the chapter, okay, this is the day and year, okay, this is the day and year, or at least the years. Do you know, like when you get into the chapter, like what time frame it is? But this one, it wouldn't do that. Well, it has something, it does mention something in the beginning of the chapter, like it's referencing how much time has passed since this one event has happened, but it's still like, that's still not really that clear. More so what happened is I would be reading and then like it would just be, okay, and then a couple pages later it would say, oh, and so many months passed since that thing that happened a couple pages ago. And it's like, whoa, you just passed like 3, 6, 8 months within 2 pages. Okay. And then you read a little bit more and it's like, oh, and it's been 8 years since blah blah blah. And it's like, well, that just happened like right back here. You really big time jumps without like any kind of warning ahead of time. I don't know, it's kind of hard to describe, but I was like, oh, whoa, okay. Oh, the character's 32 now and not 22. But that would be the only thing that kind of stood out to me as being a little bit confusing. I mean, I get why she did it, because she has a lot of ground to cover, a lot of years to get through. There is so much more I could say about this series, but it's so immersive and expansive. I feel like I would need to do like a standalone review of it, because I don't want to be here for like 20 minutes talking about this. I would want to give it more attention than just, in a wrap up. If you were interested in reading this, I highly recommend it. Definitely worth it. Lived up to the hype for me, and I would love to be able to read Jade Shards. That I think is a short story collection or a novella. No, I think it's short stories, but I guess it's only available in ebook. I've noticed that somebody had it in print, but it's been sold out, so I don't think you get it in print anymore, which is really unfortunate, because that's how I like to read my books. So that's too bad, but this is really good, really fun. I'm so glad I finally read it. And if you like anything like The Godfather, Asian culture, martial arts, I would say there's a little bit of magical realism too, as far as like how the jade interacts with everything. Highly recommend it. Gave the whole series 4.5 stars. And one of the 5-star books that I read in February is As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow, and that's by Zulfa Katao. And look how beautiful. I love this cover so much. I've had this book for a while, and I'm so glad I finally got around to reading it. This is like a historical fiction. Well, it's set more in like 2011, 2012, so not really that far back in history. However, It is historically significant for sure. This is set in Syria during the civil war that goes on there between the dictatorship and the Free Syrian Army. So in this, we follow a young lady who just turned 18 and she was going to pharmacy school. I think she only got a year done, and then civil war breaks out and they really needed her help at the hospital because, as what happens in civil wars, a lot of people ended up dying and they were really short on doctors. So she ends up doing surgery and stuff like that. Like, she just has to do what she needs to do. There were some bad things that happened with her family that I won't go into detail with. She ends up meeting a younger boy who is filming things and putting them on YouTube because he wants to share with the world what is going on there. I mean, could you even imagine? You're just living your life and your neighborhood is being bombed out, or your workplace is being bombed out, or the neighborhood across the way has been bombed out. Whenever you hear a plane, you're afraid. There's snipers that hang out on the roof and shoot little kids and pregnant women. I mean, like, that's their everyday life. That's just so horrific. She has major PTSD from this, and it takes its own special form in the book. It was really interesting how Zulfa did this in the book. She like personified the PTSD and the anxiety and did this really cool thing with weaving in and out history from her childhood and also weaving in what Salama would consider her might life, what she called her might life, because it's like you have anxiety from things that have happened in the past and currently, but then you're also thinking about, am I gonna get the future that I want, that I think I deserve? Do you even have any control over that, any power? And all they want is freedom, that's all anybody wants. And they don't think that just surviving is good enough. They want to actually live. And so she sets out to leave Syria and she wants to go with a few other people. So it basically tells a story of her working at the hospital, the people she has in her life still, and her trying to leave Syria to get to safety and freedom. But there's also that aspect of leaving your home. Nobody really wants to leave their home. Like, nobody does it unless they really have to. And I tabbed a lot and underlined a lot in this book here. I even wrote some things in the margins. I think this is a really important story. I think everybody should read this. It has really endearing characters. It has an engaging plot. And it even had like a little twist reveal kind of towards the end, which is even more heartbreaking. But the overall message of this story is hope. And so, yeah, I just think it's a really important story and more people should read it. So I'll just share with you some quotes so you get a really good sense of what this book is about. Perhaps, even without evidence, a sliver of a chance at survival is better than living at the mercy of genocide. No one takes to a rickety boat on the sea if there is no other choice. When I leave, it won't be easy. It's going to shred my heart to ribbons, and all the pieces will be scattered along Syria's shore, with the cries of my people haunting me till the day I die. I'm exhausted from all of this. I'm exhausted we're suffocating, and no one gives the slightest bit of a damn. I'm exhausted we're not even an afterthought. I'm exhausted we can't even have basic human rights. I'm also angry. I realize that anger was always there, growing and surely. It began long ago when I was born under the thumb of a dictatorship that kept on applying pressure until my bones fractured. It kindled into a small flame when the protesters' throaty voices ricocheted off our kitchen walls. It fused with my bones, its flames licking through my myocardium, leaving decayed cells in its wake. It built and built and built with each body laid in front of me, and now it's a roaring fire crackling along my nervous system. This is the price of a future with freedom, but I'm Syrian, this is my land, and just like the lemon trees that have been growing here for centuries, spilled blood won't stop us. I've been force-fed oppression, but I will no longer swallow its bitter taste. The revolution's flag is flying high over our heads, and it makes me dream of a day when we can raise it in our schools, proudly singing the national anthem, when it will represent us worldwide. For now, this flag is our shield against the cold winters, the bombs falling from the sky, and the bullets that tear into our bodies. And death is our shroud, our corpses swaddled in it as we return to the soil we vowed to protect. If we weren't in such a dire situation, this place would be beautiful. The blackness stretches out in front of us, and the moon casting his silvery glimmer, dimming the light of the stars nearby. It's the same sky other people see in their countries. But while we watch it here, hiding, not knowing if our next breath is our last, others sleep safely in their beds, bidding the moon a peaceful good night. Syria was gray, the destroyed buildings and roads, the ashy faces of the starving, sometimes the skies. Our life literally became monochrome, alternating with the harsh red. While some were able to see past it, I forgot other colors existed. I forgot happiness was a possibility. So yes, really beautiful writing. There is a little bit of a love story in here as well, and I can't believe this is a debut. This is her first novel. I need to look and see if she's written any more because this was so good. Seriously, the quotes I just said just barely scratched the surface of the beautiful writing. I love this book so much. And the last book I have to talk about is my next 5-star and the other book that did live up to the hype, I'm so glad to say, and that's The September House by Carissa Orlando, and this is a horror book, and it's 342 pages, and oh, this is so good. I love a haunted house story, and this did something really unique with it. This one I also read in that reading vlog, so that will be in that video. In this we follow a lady who lives in a Victorian house that's haunted, but she already knows that it's happening. She gets along with them. There's a ghost that makes her tea and she talks to all the time, and there's some other things going on there which maybe are kind of, could be scary, but are more so just annoying. She kind of just deals with it. And her husband has left because he couldn't handle it, so he took off. And she has a daughter who's, I think, in her 30s, so she doesn't live at the house. So the daughter finds out, like, hey, I haven't talked to dad in a while, like, what's going on? She finally figures out that he left. She's like, okay, mom, I'm coming to the house. I gotta help you find dad. And she's like, oh, great, because, like, how am I going to hide this from her? Because it's September, and every September, that's when things get real crazy. So, like, stuff kind of goes on throughout the whole year, but in September, that's when, like, things really kick up and the walls bleed and everything like that. And it's like, it doesn't matter what she does, she could clean it up, but it just keeps coming. Like, there's nothing you could really do about it. So she's like, how am I going to play this off? And her daughter is kind of annoying. I think maybe she's meant to be. If that's the case, then the author did a great job because the daughter is really annoying. I'm just like, oh my god, get her away. But I mean, she means well, you know. There's a reason why she was being like that. Anyway, there is a lot of family history with this, not only with like their family, but also the families that lived in the house before. So you get to learn more about the history of Margaret, that's the lady who we're following, and then also like the people who are haunting the house, you get to learn more about them as well. I really enjoyed how this mixed like really deep dark topics with a little bit of dark humor as well. And Grady Hendrix has a blurb on here, and I feel that's very fitting. I would think if you like Grady Hendrix, you'd probably like this book. So I was intrigued by the characters and the plot, and I love the setting of the Victorian house, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of what the premise was for The Stranger Upstairs, like minus the social media aspect. But if you like a haunted Victorian house and you are also disappointed in The Stranger Upstairs, I'd recommend reading this instead. And while this does get a little bit gory at times, I mean, it's a horror story. It has some pretty cool like twist reveals at the end, but it has an overall positive message about breaking the cycle of abuse. So there is a little bit of mention of domestic violence in here, not really like graphic on page, it's more so like mentioning things that happened in the past, but it's talking about like breaking the cycles of abuse, mental illness, things like that. So this is a really good, insightful book, like a haunted house book with substance. And I also tabbed and underlined quite a bit in here as well. So I'll just share with you a few of my favorite quotes. I didn't trust the quiet. It didn't seem like the rainbow after a storm. I had been in enough storms to know the difference. Rather, it was like the eye of a hurricane, calm but hinting at chaos in a few short moments. These things, they don't go away so easily. These things, they only wait. I had lines here. Somewhere inside of me was the right thing to say, the thing that would make everything better. My lines were in an old book somewhere, tucked far away on the bookshelf of my mind and covered in dust. I had misplaced it. Perhaps I had thrown it away years ago, not thinking. You can live with many, many things you find deplorable, especially when there are rules. Still, some problems don't have solutions, and the rule is just to cope. It's a funny thing about being alone. You never really notice it when it's happening. You're aware that nobody else is there, but you're so busy with yourself and the little things you do to occupy your time. But as with wading into cold water, you acclimate to the relative solitude until it doesn't even bother you anymore. I'd always thought it was a silly question, why I wanted to stay here in this house. This house was everything I'd ever wanted. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but sometimes it actually was. Or at least as close as anything could come to perfect in this life, which admittedly was not very close. It wasn't horrible every single day, so few things ever are, and when it wasn't horrible, it was almost lovely. I knew how to survive here, and I always had the sense that if I just survived long enough, if I just played by the rules well enough, I could make it into a perfect home once and for all. I just needed to work a little harder. I love this house, and you didn't give up on things you loved. I changed all the time. I was flexible. I bent. I had changed little by little, steadily over the years, until by all accounts I was a person who should have been unrecognizable, but to me was just who I was. I ought to have been a stranger to myself, but it didn't bother me at all. By the way, the quote at the beginning of the video is from this book. It's page 30. So this, along with As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow, have been all-time favorites so far this year. So happy to have finally read this. So glad it lived up to the hype for me. And if it sounds interesting to you and you haven't read it yet, what are you doing? Go read it! Okay friends, that will do it for my February wrap-up, and let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought, and if you haven't read any, have you added any to your TBR, and if you've made it this far, go ahead and leave me a lemon to represent one of my favorite books of the month, As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.